definitely. I've just got this vision of, you know, lots of people just completely reclining, letting these colours wash over them, because that's the final room in the exhibition. So I don't know if you know much about the exhibition already, but the show's called Postwar Modern.
Yes.
So opens in the gallery next week now, which is quite terrifying after all this time. It's actually happening, and it's about the 20 years after the war. So it's got 48 artists, and the subtitle is New Art in Britain. So we're deliberately looking at artists who were making new work immediately after the war, and how these different artists were working across painting, sculpture, photography, collage, installation like Gustav Metzger, and how they were negotiating what life was like after the war, and sort of how they were kind of navigating this entirely untrod territory, and how they were using their artwork to do that. And it was something that I just thought was just so interesting and so timely, because, you know, this is 1945 to 1965, it's a long time ago, but at the same time it feels incredibly resonant now that artists and, well, everybody, we're trying to make sense of a very different world to what it was a few years ago. And what we were really interested in unpacking was actually how post-war modern felt relevant now. Because I had this feeling that, you know, some people will be like, this is just 20 years of British art, and, you know, I was worried that people might think it's going to be a bit dry and doesn't really feel relevant to now. So that was something that we were really, really keen to explore, and we were talking about who better to help us negotiate that and think about it than an artist, which is why we reached out to Abbas, because a lot of, you know, working to kind of understand where you are in the world and navigate this kind of very difficult territory with, you know, a moment of profound crisis again. And because your practice is so much about conversations and dialogue and building that up with different groups of people, we just felt it would be a really amazing fit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it was a kind of a new direction for me to work on a kind of a public program in this way, alongside a show that has a kind of more art historical approach, and to kind of have the chance to blend these two together felt like a really interesting opportunity.
Yeah.
And out of our initial conversations came the collaboration with the Young Visual Arts Group.
Yep.
And so I did a workshop, and then you guys followed up with some installations and work that you prepared as a consequence of work you were already doing as well in the space. And I got to learn about all the groups that use the Barbican, not just visual arts, but poets, a whole young network of people. And it just felt very natural to say, well, why don't we kind of find a way to base the program around this group of artists who are in a way the equivalent of what we're showing in the show.
Exactly.
From that time. And since that time to now, there have been so many other moments that we would like to say we are post, you know, other kind of crises, other just situations. And you know, just in the last 20 years, there's been so many things, from the pandemic to the war on terror to Brexit to Donald Trump, and, you know, so many things that people are working through. And at the same time, we're having these conversations about, you know, post-humanism and all of us being uploaded into the metaverse, and kind of, you know, post everything. Like pretty much anything you can define, there's someone trying to define the post of that thing right now.
Completely.
Yeah, so, you know, even cryptocurrencies is post money and all this kind of stuff. So it just felt like an interesting moment to say, well, if the artists at that time, the way we look at them historically, obviously there was much more going on for them individually in their lives than the kind of, like, historically how we perceive that period. But maybe if we do it in a contemporary way and speak to people now, we'll kind of get a sense of a richer idea of what is this landscape actually like, and how does it have similarities with the themes in the show, which are kind of things that are still being navigated in relation to how artists are practicing, and also the differences, which are interesting to see. How do artists differentiate themselves in kind of a contemporary practice, and sort of what is a studio even, or do you kind of, are people still making paintings in the same way, or kind of, you know, like, is it such a formalistic concern of being an artist, or is it kind of something else? And I think having this dialogue with the show in a way of having even the artists from the visual arts group going into the show and then kind of doing their own work alongside the show in the spaces that are kind of being provided for that throughout the program. It just feels like kind of creating a site in relation to a site.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas in speaking with people like Hamad Nassar, who's also involved in working with the show, kind of this idea of the minor institution came about, and trying to think about how, you know, these other spaces that support artistic practice that are not the main formalistic institutional spaces. So how could we create another space within an institution like the Barbican? And the Barbican is actually one of the few institutions that really lends itself to that process, where it kind of has these pockets and these kind of open public areas that people just use to kind of do their own activities.
Yeah.
So that kind of was my thinking around the program, of like just situating things and seeing what comes out of it, as opposed to trying to prescribe what we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at the centre of it is the studio that's going to be down on level G in the centre, which is called Outpost Studio.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is, you know, the way that you conceived that was very much about it being this space for young artists, young poets, communities to come and take ownership of that space.
Yes.
And to be a place where people can come and work, belongs to them completely, which is just such a beautiful kind of generous spirited thing, which and again really resonates, I think, with the exhibition. This kind of bringing hope and generosity.
I mean, it's really, I was inspired to do that because I met with the group.
Yeah.
You know, like, and you know, Diane, the exhibitions that you did afterwards, when I came and saw kind of in the foyer area, the fountain room, I was blown away. I was like, how did you do this in 2 weeks? You know, so it's kind of really, I felt like having a dedicated space would just kind of support some of that work going forwards. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say a bit about your own work or kind of your involvement in the Young Visual Arts group.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this, like, I also think like the thing that Abbas allowed us to like work in this in his studio. It's such a like beautiful, like it's so beautiful, and like this gesture feels like an artwork itself. Like
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so many layers.
Yeah, like this allowing it to happen is almost like an artwork, or is an artwork. But I think, yeah, I just thought like this is so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I with visual Young Visual Arts Group, I think the main idea, or this is how I see it, is just to bring young creative people together who are fascinated by art, or who want to work, whether as an artist or curators or in any way in the art industry, and like to bring them together in one space and give them tools and give them tools and an environment for them to like work with each other and to develop each other. Like, so it's almost like facilitating this like organism and just like feeding it like with knowledge and with help and with experience to work on its own. So it's not like I don't see it like saying like, oh, you need to work on this or you need to do that, or but it's more like about which I also think is very beautiful, because I think it's like how we can best help you for you to do what is your dream in a way.
Yeah.
Like how we can help you.
Yeah. I think the tools idea is a really nice one, because, and like you say, just being supported and given that space, whether it's a studio or having a mentoring session, which I know you're going to do in the studio. You've got some crits set up.
Yeah, we're not calling them crits just because that was
it's
another
a horrible
thing.
world.
I mean, it's a kind of response to, again, the group. When we use the word crit, people kind of, you know, I could sense that wasn't necessarily a term that felt relevant, and it is a very formal term that we use in art education, so we presented another idea of something like a council, you know, like almost like the idea of counseling, giving advice, sharing, listening, you know, those kinds of skills, which I feel are quite important skills that artists have. You know, like I don't think of an artist as like we are kind of like our position is in relation to what we produce. I think the position of being an artist is more in relation to what we do. So we often sit around, we discuss our ideas, we kind of give each other feedback. We sort of have these days where we might not do anything and just lie around, and you know, we're kind of quite intellectually promiscuous in a way. You know, we kind of, magpies always like kind of looking for something new and shiny and kind of easily distracted, but that's kind of where we derive our inspiration from. And yeah, just all, kind of like it's almost like we're part of this like club, like you can meet another artist and then just have like a long chat with them. Like they don't feel like a stranger, you know. There's a sort of common sense of these types of ways of engagement, terms of engagement in a sense. So for me, that kind of foregrounding that and saying, well, that's kind of as a group, how do we facilitate that? And so having a kind of a space where you can meet and do these sessions, which are kind of more based around the things that artists do in the kind of processes of making work, as opposed to just kind of presenting technical workshops or kind of those kind of processes. And yeah, so that was something that the group felt receptive to. I don't know if that's something you guys are conscious of, that you benefit a lot from that type of thing.
Yes.
So when Abbas came to do the workshop with you, how kind of was that structured? Was it more sort of talking as a group, or did you have individual conversations, or?
I think it was so Abbas. Sorry, do I pronounce?
It's fine.
Abbas showed us a presentation of his work, and this story of. Or it's how I remember it, maybe I'm wrong. But this story of how you actually started doing artwork, because I remember you said that you were studying medicine.
Yeah, initially.
Yeah, and then there was this switch that. So there was the story about like how Abbas started doing work, and then. The journey and with different destination, which I remember, for example, raising up money to study at CSM by selling this like parts of exhibition from Pavilion.
Yeah, on Gumtree.
Yes.
I saw I was selling work like this.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the main reason I was mentioning those things was just to kind of show that how much of my own kind of process and development occurred outside of an institution or an art school. It was spaces like here, like the group that you have, kind of being around people, and just those spaces that just give you a sense of kind of working out what you're doing, you know, like, and you don't know, like someone might suggest something, or you just kind of being in dialogue kind of is really the part of it. And one of the things that I really found interesting after that session was when I came to see the works that you guys produced, you know, in the fountain room. And if you can remind me, which one of the groups were you in?
I was in the group who transformed the toilet into kind of a care room or restroom.
That was amazing. Like I remember when you were saying the idea, and I was trying to imagine how it's going to work, and then actually there was a lot going on in there. I don't know, do you want to kind of explain it a bit?
I mean, I think the idea was because the space was, like the whole space was very interesting, so we, for example, could choose elevator, like very old elevator. And but then we heard that we are allowed to like use one cubicle for an artwork, and we thought like this can be actually interesting to transform the cubicle, which is something like it's actually very, very private space, and to to not use the space that we have, but use the cubicle instead. And I think we started thinking about like what is the space about and how we can transform it into this, because I think like the general idea was the idea of repair in whatever the way we want to think about. And so we started thinking how the place can be facilitated or transformed, or what it can be. So there was a lot of brainstorm and trying to figure out like maybe this way, maybe this way, maybe this way, and then we thought that it would be like actually space for care and for rest, and so we can like choose different like patterns, different materials and different textures and different light, and like there was
a playlist as well. There was sound.
Yes, because
you could select which kind of soothing soundscape you want to have in the toilet cubicle.
Yes, because we were thinking about like where is the place for someone who comes to the space, like how they can reclaim the space, or like what is their agency in the space. So I thought like we can allow everyone to make decisions in the space, like even with things like the choosing of music. So we thought we won't like put something, but in a way like how someone can make the space their own space.
I think what was also interesting, because in those sessions you were working with the poets as well.
Yes.
There's the young visual arts group and the young poets. And so the linguistic element, the language was, so calling it the rest room is actually what we call the toilet when we go. But actually in this case it was actually a place to rest. Like you wanted to stay there and relax, which I thought was quite clever, that you guys just kind of, it's almost like you're highlighting what's already there. You're kind of making visible this idea of like, well, we need spaces to rest. Why don't we have that?
Yes. But I think the idea was also sorry, because now I'm thinking like what you said about the last room of the exhibition, when everyone is lying down and can be like washed by these patterns and like colors and everything. And I think also like the space was this idea of being overwhelmed by the exhibition. Like being, which is actually, I mean, not every exhibition, but sometimes it's a very big chunk, and sometimes there's a lot of people and a lot of different art forms, and it can be like very overwhelming experience in a way. So we would thought how the part of the exhibition can be a space to let go of that in a way.
That's a really interesting point, and I think that's probably something that is worth kind of relating back to the show, because in the time that many of the works in the show were made, which were quite very visual works as well, it's at a time when visual stimulation wasn't at the same level that we have now. So like it's almost like we're now in a time where we're hyper stimulated on our phones, etc., screens. Pandemic made it even worse, and then kind of exhibition becomes a different kind of a place. You don't want to go somewhere where you have more visual stimulation or overstimulation. You actually want to have a place to kind of rest, or to have a kind of distance from this. Whereas maybe in the past, the exhibition was actually a place where you went, and it was one of the few times you could be visually stimulated in that way. Yeah,
that's so interesting to reflect on that, isn't it? Because in the exhibition, it's quite stripped back. So there's a lot of work in there, and there are 48 artists, and it's across lots of different types of artwork. But we deliberately tried to keep it quite stripped back, not to feel like you were being completely bombarded, because a lot of the subjects and the topics that were being discussed are really heavy, really weighty. And I think particularly because they feel so resonant now, you want to kind of let it wash over you. We keep coming back to this, like something washing over you and comforting you. And as opposed to going in and feeling all this kind of visual noise, actually feels very peaceful in there, which feels, and I felt an enormous amount of joy sort of seeing it all come together. And and I think it's also something people can reflect on. And for me anyway, I can't reflect and kind of feel close to myself if I'm being bombarded by all this kind of overstimulation, like you say. We are so used to it now. And again, I was just thinking, I walked past the Outpost studio, and it's this lovely kind of very serene looking grey building at the heart of the Barbican, which is, you know, for all these conversations to happen, for these supportive councils to take place. And it all just feels like this really beautiful kind of winding thread through all the work that we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in this like about like the stimulation and overstimulation, and what Abbas said about being an artist and like being almost, if I understood it correctly, about being a magpie who tries to spot things or like glossy things. And I'm just thinking about it in relation to, like, for example, being like overly stimulated all the time, but by noise, by media and everything. I'm just thinking if there is any other way to, because then, like, if everything is so stimulating, how, I'm just thinking if there is any other way to like look or get inspired by something, if not by this being a magpie, if that makes sense.
It's funny because you know, often when I make work, people think that I'm a minimalist. You know, that's how they talk about my work, and then I think to myself, well, to be honest, having space and a kind of an empty space feels like a rare thing these days, especially if you're living in a city like London, you know. And you know, there's a lot of relationship in terms of the war to like metropolitan areas. You know, even migration back then was people moving from much more rural parts of the country or the world into these kind of metropolitan centers, often for their work and for their kind of just to survive after the war effort. The urbanization really became much more the kind of engine of society after this process. And so we are kind of living at the apex of this situation now, where we're like so urbanized, due to many of the interventions that came after the war, you know. And how work changed, and I think as an artist, like I get a space and I'm like, keep it empty. You know, I'm just, because I just feel like this space is helpful to just be in and have some peace, and that kind of influences my way of making work. And I just wonder how you find it with your own work or the work of the group you're in, because the restroom in a way was something really responding to the wider context.
Yeah, I think like this idea of doing it actually in the restroom was in a way inspired by Abbas. Actually.
Yeah.
Because and this idea of coming to the space and like not changing it in any way, but like it's more almost about staying genuine and honest to what's already there and working from that point. So I think we also wanted to use space as a cubicle, which has like particular energy, or is in a way very, it's like something in a way. It's not just gallery space, it's cubicle. Yeah. And then like how we can work on what's already there. I think we tried to, in a way, we tried to be inspired by how Abbas is treating space.
Yeah, I mean, what I find interesting in that approach is that what we have in common, and many artists of our generation have in common, is the emphasis on mental health in our work. And that's something we're very conscious of, and we're kind of trying to make space for it to be recognized and addressed, remediated in various ways. And it kind of brings me back to this idea of, like, in the period that we're discussing with the show, that, you know, it was really the time when the British psychiatry school was really coming into its own, and the ideas of what's called the object relation school, which was, you know, started, it really defines the British approach to mental health. And these ideas were being developed after the war, and so it's kind of this notion that, like, when artists are, and I'm sure that much of the work is actually a kind of reflection of this. You know, there's a lot that can be read into that, and I know we've often talked about the work in that way, you know, and I think also another thing that kind of comes into, like, that comes out of that same conversation is this trying to like understand this shared humanity that we have as kind of people from different backgrounds and different places. Obviously the world is much more globalized than it was back then, but usually after there's been a crisis or some kind of a war situation, there is this kind of the conversation around human rights, and that's one of the things in the program where, you know, I've got someone who's a human rights lawyer who's worked with Amnesty for over 30 years in conflict zones, and they will actually be talking about the show, and I think there's a conversation to put them in contact with the Young Visual Arts Group as well, and the poets, to kind of get this sense of, when we talk about these conflicts, you know, there's different ways of looking at the conflict, from the art perspective, from the perspective of mental health, but also perspective of human rights because of all the situations around the atrocities in the war, but also the kind of migration element. You know, there's a lot of refugees now coming from Afghanistan, which is something, you know, we're thinking about as well in relation to the program. So all of these things kind of, I feel like for me it's really interesting to put them in dialogue with one another and just see what comes out of it. And I feel like artists are much more in a position to be part of those conversations and not just responding to them by kind of monumentalizing, but actually being involved in what does it mean to be a human in this time.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's also interesting to think about the therapeutic nature of making work as well, and that the fact that a number of artists in the exhibition would speak very openly about the fact that they were reflecting on what they've been through, and whether they were painting repetitively or working with bronze or developing photographs or making collages, it was all kind of like a way of feeling through and understanding what had happened. So it becomes a useful thing as well. So not just kind of actually being a mirror or reflecting something back, but working through something. And that's something I think that's really beautiful about the exhibition, is there are lots of work where you can see the making of things. So there's some works that are, you know, incredibly beautiful. Well, they're all incredibly beautiful, but it's somewhere the things that would be considered flaws, you know, an uneven texture on a pot, a lumpy surface on a canvas, those were actually deliberately kept in because it's a way of showing you're working, you know, this is what I've done, this is my decision that I've made. And that's again kind of instilling this agency that artists have. Like you're talking about your work and the way in which you kind of use it to take agency back and give it to people, like, you know, again, this kind of gifting that we've been talking about. Yeah,
I think that's a really beautiful point. Like, to be an artist is a very willful act, you know, this idea of agency, and then to find agency after a period of crisis that is really a gift to be able to do that, because that's a kind of testament to the human spirit in many ways. So I feel like that's why we keep doing this. You know, even when it feels like we don't know what's going to happen, it's that sense of giving some agency back and actually finding a way after when so much has changed. Yeah,
and I think it's also this kind of solidarity and community as well.
Definitely.
Which I think is, you know, by again placing this studio and the collaboration that's developing is so much about community kind of coming together, like this conversation, coming from different viewpoints and having this conversation feels like an incredible act of sort of solidarity and community. Yeah.